Hello everyone, welcome to Wildcraft Dyeing. Today we are going to be doing part 2 of indigo dyeing. Part 1 was setting up the vat. Part 2 will be using the vat. Come join us. Now when it comes to using indigo, there's many different ways to use it. There's many different ways to set up the vat. It's not like a lot of other dyes, because what we're dying to do to darken the color is it's the number of dips, number of times the fiber is going to go in, and the number of times we're going to leave it to hang and get exposure to oxygen in between those dips that is going to help determine our color at the end. That's the first part of the video. And the second part of the video is going to be having a bit of fun using indigo as an overdye. Indigo is a really popular overdye technique to get a range of colors, including greens. It's really the most stable way to get a green, is to have dyed something with a stable yellow, have it yellow, and dip it in to get green. And I have a couple of other colors. I've got madder, which is red, and a cochineal, which is pink. Thinking ahead to where you're gonna hang up your fabric, your yarn, whatever it is you're gonna be dyeing. Think about it. The indigo vat is gonna have a high pH. It's very basic. So you might not wanna put it where to hang right on your plants. But as you can see here in my front yard, I have a place that has kind of these bricks. So I'm gonna set up a drying rack on top of that, because I know it's going to drip into those bricks. If you don't have a spot outside, and I recognize that not everybody does, you can also put out a tarp with a hanging apparatus over top, and that tarp is going to capture the drips. I wouldn't recommend dripping into your bathtub or into a shower, because that indigo can stain it. A quick message to say that while this video focuses on using wool yarn, you can also use plant fiber fabric and do similar dips with similar results. Okay, over to the yarn. Like any dye project, you want to start with scouring, which is to heat your fiber with a small amount of mild soap, just to make sure that you're getting out any lanolin or anything else that might be in the fiber that's going to inhibit dye take up. Lastly, before we start, indigo is a substantive dyer, which means you do not need to mordant like other natural dyes. You can jump right in. If you're going to be doing a lot of fiber with multiple steps, you need a system of organization. Now, this is one I saw being used at a dye demo, a historical demo in Finland, and I really like it. As you can see, with indigo, you don't need to do it on a pot on the stove. You can actually do it in a bin or a bucket. And here I have set up sticks. This type of bin, as you can see, has a kind of an inner lip, and that allows these sticks, these rods, to rest on them. And I'm going to be filling this pot with an indigo vat in a little bit. And so what I'm doing now is I'm just organizing each of the skeins that I have. These are each 20-meter skeins. They're about 11 grams each. And I'm setting them up with a loop of yarn to rest on the sticks. And so what I can do is, once the vat is set up and those yarn has been soaking in water, I'm going to take them in and take them off of the vat using these rods. And so I'm not sort of fiddling around with indigo, because the indigo vat itself is going to get quite dark. It can be kind of confusing. But if I'm tracking the dips and where we are based upon the system of rods, it's going to be much easier to keep track of everything. So I'm going to set up 2 rods here full of yellow. So when you are doing this process, you want to make sure that each of your loops is the same length, and that the loop is long enough that it's going to completely submerge each of the skeins under water, under the vat. If you don't, you're going to end up with paler spots on top. As you can see, there is 2 full rods of different shades of yellow that were pre-dyed with other natural dyes, such as osage and onion skins and birch leaves and lots of other things on this channel. Those are going to be covered in the next part, which is going to be overdyeing yellow to get greens. The next part of the video is going to be discussion of the white and how we're going to get a gradient, and looking at that gradient is going to allow you to really zero in on the color you're going to want from your vat. Here, as you can see, I'm just tying off the rods, which is just going to help me make sure that everything, all of those loops, stay on the rod as I take them out and set forward in terms of setting up the vat. So I wanted to design an experiment that set up a visual demonstration of the range of colors that can be achieved with indigo. So I don't cover how to set up a vat of indigo because I did a whole video, part 1, on how to do that. So in this image, as you can see, I am pouring the indigo starter that was set up into the vat. This is done slowly without drips. You don't want agitation at the surface because the introduction of oxygen creates conditions where the indigo becomes inert. So I've added it, and then I'm going to leave it for an hour to start. As that's setting, and as you can see here, once you put it in, you want to do a slow agitation and, in a circle, clockwise or counterclockwise, just to get that indigo off the bottom. And now we'll leave that for the hour. Back over to our fiber, we want to make sure that we soak everything for 1 hour, not the usual 20 minutes. You really want to give it that hour because you want it to sink down into the vat. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding the water and soaking. And looking back, I wish I had separated out the white fiber from the yellow and other colors because when it was soaking, there's just so much yellow dye that the white, you'll see it the first time it gets sent, it goes into the vat. It's a little bit of an off cream yellow, very, very pale yellowy color. So I wish I had separated that, but I did not think of it. So here, just adding the water again, and I'm going to leave it for 1 hour. All right, let's focus on the white yarn. This has been soaking for an hour. I'm going to spread it out along the stick. And as you'll see, so ignore the red and the pink just for a second. There are 10 individual skeins along that road of white. As you can see, it's a little bit off white. But as it goes in, I'm going to put this dip in, and you can see it's not quite sinking in as well as I would like. So I'm just trying to sort of shove it below the surface. So there's 10 skeins, and I'm going to leave all 10 in for 10 minutes. And I'm going to leave it. Now it's time to remove your fiber and give it a rest in the air. How we do that is we very carefully lift it out of the vat, making as few drips as possible. You want to minimize agitation at the surface. And then you want to make sure that you're taking your fiber and giving it a good squeeze. You want as much oxygen to get into that fiber as possible. And if you have larger skeins that you're working with, or fiber or fabric, you want to make sure that you're opening it up so that the maximum amount of airflow is happening. As you can see on the side here, I've got a second bin, and I'm just making sure that that air can get in underneath, so I'm not having it rest on a hard surface. So this part gets a little bit repetitive. We're putting in the fiber for 10 minutes. We're taking it out and letting it rest for 10 minutes, taking one off. Then I'm putting the rod back on each time. And I'm going to do this for 10 times altogether. All right, I wanted to show the results of the gradient we got here. So this was done in 10 minutes in, and then we pulled one out each time. You can see the number of dips at the end. This has had 10 dips, and that had 1 dip. And you can play around with it. That was 10 minutes in, 10 minutes out. You could do 20 minutes in, 10 or 20 minutes out, and that will darken it much more quickly. All right, I'm gonna show you a trick to rinsing these, because if you just pick them all up, it's gonna be hard to get the order back again. So what you can do is chain them like this. And as you can see, when it goes in, you're gonna keep that order. You can also label them, but I don't really have time to label them. There we go. Now we can go rinse it. Now, this next step is about overdying with indigo. As you can see, you're just going to soak your fiber as you did before for about 1 hour before it goes in. Now, in general, the paler, you want to dye the paler color first. In this case, it's yellow. And then for overdying, I usually put it in for 5 minutes and then out for 10 minutes. And that is going to zero in, especially the kind of the green that you want. Now, I have been reading about whether you might want to do the indigo first and then overdye, let's say a yellow afterwards, because the thiourea, if you're using thiourea in your reduction vat, it can shift the colors. I haven't experienced that myself, and so I tend to do the indigo second, and that gives me a chance to sort of build up a big stock of different shades using different materials, and then I can do indigo all on that one day, which I guess the reverse is also true, to be fair. But I'm going to do those 5-minute dips, 10-minute rests until I'm happy with the shade. I used to do much shorter dips, even 30 seconds. But the problem is if you do really, really short dips, the indigo takes differently on different parts. If you're doing fabric or you're doing yarn, it's really inconsistent in terms of what color, what parts the indigo really sticks to. So having a slightly longer period, like 5 minutes, is going to give you a much more even result. And it's also going to give you darker greens at the end. So basically, you're just going to keep dipping until you're happy with the color. Again, if you have a really, really strong, really concentrated vat that's just going dark right away, you might want to lessen that 5 minutes even lower. Again, or if you have what's a much weaker vat, you might want to increase the 5 minutes. But I think to start with, 5 minutes in, 10 minutes out is the way to go. And then you just keep going until you're happy with the color. And then you're going to let that rest for 30 minutes. And I'm going to talk about rinsing the fiber in the next section. So just to reiterate, you can see that I'm using a bowl to catch the drips. You really want to reduce the amount of dripping that happens into the vat. Every drip agitates and causes some of that indigo to not be reduced, to become inert and loses its power as a dye. So it's really just smooth motions in, smooth motions out, and trying to reduce the amount of agitation that you see, and that's going to help retain the power of your vat. Now, once you're happy with the shade of green, keeping in mind that once it's dry, it can tend to lighten slightly. So I often just dye it a little bit darker than what I'm looking for. You're going to take it over to your drying rack. And again, just like in the first section, try to make sure where it's dripping isn't a place that you're concerned about staining, like a white bathtub. Overdyeing is not just limited to yellows. You can use color theory to create a lot of different shades. Here, I overdyed cochineal to get a lilac, and I overdyed madder. I was sort of hoping for a purple. It came out much more of a deep maroon, but just a reminder that you can always use indigo on all sorts of different colors. It is a great way to get purple if you're doing cochineal or let's say Eastern Brazil wood, and then you overdye. That is actually a more stable purple than dyeing with something like logwood. Doing this is a very historical, medieval thing to overdye with indigo. In fact, it can go back to much earlier, even Viking age, when it was overdyed with woad. But really play around with it. Try when you're dyeing to create a few extra bits of material of your different colors and keep them for an indigo day. I think it's really worth playing around with and just having some fun. Have some fun. Here was the greens. Well, they were yellows. Now they came out beautiful greens. A few more things to come out, but we're doing pretty good. Next section is for people who are aiming to get a dark blue in their fiber. And here it's very simple. We're going to follow the same steps that we did before, which is that we're going to soak our fiber for an hour. I have in this system attached my yarn to a rod for dipping. I just find that a really easy way to keep everything organized. This was a system that I learned from Finnish friends. It is not one that I invented, so I don't want to take credit for it. And you're going to put it in. Now, the question is, how long are you going to leave it in for each time? Now, to get the gradient we did in the first part of the video, those were 10-minute dips. But here, if all I'm interested in is a dark shade, I would suggest 15-minute in and then 15-minute out to rest, giving everything a good squeeze and opening it up for that rest period, and just keeping that cycle going until it's a shade that you are looking for. I'll even would recommend a slightly darker shade than you're looking for, because as indigo dries, it does tend to lighten a bit. So just keep that in mind. And the other thing I'd recommend is if you're using the system that I have here and you have enough fiber that you have 2 rods, you can just alternate one in, one out for those 15-minute periods. And we're going to recharge the vat as it goes. The recharging is going to be covered in the next section. Start with recharging. When do you recharge your vat? So as a guideline, if you have a pound of fiber, which is about 400 grams, you are going to, once you have that fiber to the color that you want, a nice medium to deep shade usually, you need to recharge your vat. To do that, you're just going to create a new starter following those steps. You're going to put it back into your solution, give it a nice gentle stir, and again, you're going to leave it for about an hour just so that it gets reduced again. So that way is how you recharge a vat. Okay, it's the next day, and there's 2 more things we need you to wrap up. One is going to be giving these a rinse to get off any of that inert indigo that is sitting on them. That's number 1. We're going to show you how to do that in a second. And then number 2 is going to be how you dispose of the vat, given that the pH was so high yesterday. Let's get started. Now, rinsing is pretty straightforward. I usually like to let things rest for a day after they've been dyed and out of the sun. And then I'm going to just rinse them at room temperature, and I add a splash of vinegar just to make sure that that indigo is nice and inert. And then I just, again, rinse it until the water is clear, and I'm going to hang it back up to dry, and you should be good to go. When it comes to disposal, you do not want to pour your vat right away down the sink because that pH is so high. If you are in a septic system, it can damage the bacteria that you need, even in the city, no matter what. Give it 48 to 72 hours. Give it that 2 to 3 days. As that time goes by, the vat will stabilize back at a more neutral amount. The indigo becomes inert, and then it is safe to pour down. But please give it that rest because that pH is very high at first, and I don't want to see you damage your systems. Thanks. And that's it from my end. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you take the plunge and try dyeing with indigo on your own. Please like and subscribe for future videos.